Good morning, YouTubers. Thanks for joining again and listening in on this old man talking about a young sailor's life in the Navy. As we left off last week, or at my last video, I was en route from San Angelo, Texas, where I received my A school training, to my first overseas duty station. This 18-year-old was about to get indoctrinated into a foreign country. I hope you'll enjoy it. If you do, give me a thumbs up and give me a like, and possibly subscribe to my channel so that you're notified anytime I put a new video out. Anyway, stand by. Okay, here we go. I left San Angelo, and it's kind of foggy at my age right now. I think I had 10 days leave, so I think I flew from San Angelo, Texas back to Albany, New York, traveled back home for 10 days, and then somehow I think I ended up going to the Naval Receiving Station in Brooklyn, New York. God, what a hellhole that was. That's where I got my first experience on an aircraft carrier, and not what you think. I didn't go on one. There was a bunch of us young kids waiting for further transportation overseas, and we said, hey, there's an aircraft carrier over in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Let's go over and take a look at it. So after our work day was over, 3 or 4 of us all gathered together, big old hot sailors, all Siemens E3s, E2s, and we went across the street into the Brooklyn Navy Yard looking for the aircraft carrier. Now, how can you miss an aircraft carrier? Anyways, we walked around for 10 or 15 minutes and we could not find the aircraft carrier. So we stopped some yard worker and we said, hey, buddy, where's the aircraft carrier? And the guy looked like we were crazy, gave us a thumb over his shoulder and said, right there. Well, behind us was a great big, what we thought was a warehouse building with scaffolding, and it was really the aircraft carrier. But when you're down on the ground looking up and you couldn't see a flight deck, it didn't overhang, and there was no elevator openings or anything, we really didn't know. What a disappointment. Anyways, so much for that story, and let's continue on. We got in from Brooklyn. They took us over to, I believe it's the Andrews Air Force Base over in New Jersey, and we flew out of there to Rhine, Maine Air Force Base. And we spent a night in Rhine, Maine, where I was the only one that was heading to Cypress, Ireland to Cypress. The next day they put me on a plane to Cyprus. But the evening before, it seems somehow, since I wasn't a partier or a drinker, I was the only one in the group that had any funds. And they all wanted to go downtown in Germany. I didn't. I was not a drinker. Well, they took me over to the Airmen's Club, and they introduced me to screwdrivers, vodka and orange juice. They figured they'd get me a little tipsy, and I would support as we all ran down, got on a Liberty bus, and made it into Germany. And so we'd see some bars down there. Unfortunately, as the evening progressed and the drinks got stronger, by the way, a mixed drink over there at the time only cost $0.25. I really got loaded. And as I was stumbling out of the Airmen's Club, I just barfed all over the lawn. So much for my trip down into Germany. And made it back to the barracks, passed out until the next morning when I finally did get up, feeling really bad. By the way, that is the last time I ever drank vodka. To this day, I do not drink vodka. Anyways, got me on an airplane, zapped me right off in my bright new, remember I told you they gave me $300 for civilian clothes because I was going to Cyprus? That's embassy type duty. I was going to be attached to the embassy in Cyprus. But we wore civilian clothes. So there I am, I'm flying into Cyprus, get off at the airport, and guess what? This young sailor didn't have a passport. Anyways, I was able to get into the island of Cyprus on a copy of my orders and my ID card, my Navy ID card. It seems to defeat the purpose of wearing a civilian suit, doesn't it? And 2 days later, of course, they took pictures and ended up getting me a passport. And that's probably the luckiest break of my life because I ended up with a maroon covered passport that's maroon. And inside it, it said traveling abroad under official business for the U.S. government. Do you know how many times that got me through luggage checks and security things at airports? It was like being a diplomatic immunity by that passport. It didn't have any, but it was an official government passport, government worker passport. So it got a lot of head of the line privileges. They'd see the passport and they'd wave me on through. 18-year-old kid, 19-year-old boy, I kind of like that. felt kind of special. But there I made it they picked us up and took us down or up. I was the only one that was going down to into Nicosia, Cyprus. I ended up going to the place the government had rented a hotel, the Hotel Cleopatra. And there was a four-story hotel. It was all taken over by the Navy people and any other workers attached to the embassy, that all male, of course, with no females allowed. But it did have a restaurant, and it had its own bar. It had a whole pool table. But the big thing about the Cleopatra Hotel is you get up on the roof and you look over and you look down into the back of the cabaret that was next door. In the cabaret next door, when you looked over the back, that's the dressing room for the girls in the cabaret. So we could sit up there on that roof and look right in, because there was no roof at just a wall around it. And we just looked right into that cabaret dressing room. For a young 17 or 18-year-old boy, that was really something special. It didn't take me long, though, in my course of time in Cyprus, to go out with my friends and learn what a cabaret was. I had never been that before. I didn't know what a bar girl was. It's a young, innocent kid. And at the time I was drinking, my introduction was rum and Coke. Mostly Coke, probably, because I wanted something that tasted sweet. That's where I also learned in my young days that you drink rum and Coke, it's just like drinking Coke. And you drink so much of it and you get drunk pretty fast. And it's that carbonated water or carbonated soda that gives you the hangover. It's not the rum, it's the Coke. I convinced myself of that. So in the regression of life, I would go from rum and Coke to 7 and 7 to whiskey and 7 to whiskey and water. And I eventually ended up at 19 years old, I ended up with scotch and water, or scotch and soda. And to this day, I still drink scotch. I do have an occasional beer. For a while, I did drink a lot of beer too, but that was the only two things I drank, either scotch or beer. In the cabarets, I was there with a friend one day, and we got talking to a couple of girls. Of course, they were hired in there, and they were drinking with us. Well, drinking tea to our booze, I guess, but I was paying a good price. When the tab came at the end of the evening, it was $104. And neither one of us had that much money with us, not even close. Anyways, my buddy was a sweet talker. He talked to the manager, and he let us go home, and we promised faithfully to bring the money the next day. So the next day after we went home, I divvied into my little savings and paid my half of the bill and gave it to him, and I assume he paid it off the next day. I never returned to that particular cabaret, but I did find other ones in my course of travels. And then one day I was into another cabaret, and of course this time I learned about the young girls that were sucking drinks for you. And I had stopped doing that, or if I wouldn't buy them an alcohol or a whiskey or a champagne. If I was going to buy them anything, I'd buy them a beer. They had to drink a beer with me. That's where they popped the top at, right in front of you. So it wasn't anything special. That's when I met a Turkish girl named Giljan. Now Giljan was considerably older than me. She was probably 25, around 25-ish. Pretty young woman. But of course, I was 18, 19, and I was in love. My first overseas love. I figured I was going to give up everything, marry this 25-year-old Turkish bar girl, and bring her back to the States, and we'd live happily ever after. Let's see, that romance lasted just about a month, maybe 2 months, until she found a much richer patron to satisfy her needs. Anyways, poor